You're listening to The Jewish Truth Bomb with Lenny Goldberg.
Hey, this is Lenny Goldberg, and thanks for joining me today. This past week, a very important Jew passed away. His name was Avraham Herzlich, known as the Jewish Shepherd. And I knew him well because he was the father of Tali Kahana, who was the wife of Binyamin Kahana. They were murdered by Arabs on December 31st, 2000. And after that murder, in order to help take care of the kids who are now orphans, Avraham Herzlich and his wife Aviva left their homes in Kfar Zaitim, which is in the north, a little village near Tiberias. They left Kfar Zaitim and they moved here to Tepuach. And so he has been shepherding his flocks in the Shomron for over 20 years now. And besides being a shepherd, and it's not such a simple thing, there's not that many Jewish shepherds around, he had strong ideology, very strong opinions. Now, what also makes him interesting is that he's originally from Brooklyn, New York. You would never know it looking at him or hearing him speak, but he left the United States where he had a pretty good life. He was working for a racing car agency. He loved cars and he would drive the nicest cars, part of his work. But apparently that wasn't enough for him. He wanted something more. And he made that trip to Israel. He became a Baal Tshuva. That is, he became an observant Jew, but not in the usual way. It wasn't through a yeshiva or through some kiruv organization of outreach. But what brought him close to Judaism was when he observed the Yemenite Jewish community in Israel. You see, the Yemenite Jews, they're like in a time capsule. And the way they practice Judaism, the way they pronounce the Aleph Bet, their prayers, even when they speak, they're very authentic in the way that, in our 2,000-year exile, they changed the least. What do I mean? Well, the way they pronounce the Aleph Bet. In the Aleph Bet, you have letters that apparently, they have the same sound, like an Aleph and an Ayin, a Chaf and a Chet, a Taf and a Tet. If you know Hebrew, you know what I'm talking about. So a lot of the letters seem to have the same sound, but the fact is, they don't. And the Yemenite Jews pronounce the letters properly. That is, they pronounce the Chet a little different than the Chaf. And they pronounce the Aleph different than the Ayin. Their Ayin is a lot more guttural. And their Chet isn't really a Chet, it's more like a Chet. And their Taf is a Tha. Like an English TH, a Tha. That's how they do a Taf. Now this makes a lot of sense, because why should a Taf and a Tet sound like a T? There's nothing that's superfluous in Judaism, right? All the more so the Aleph Bet. And so the fact that they distinguish between the letters, that shows they're on the right track. Because the Yemenite Jews were around the Arabs, and that's a Semitic language. And therefore, the way they spoke Hebrew was a lot less influenced because the Arab language is closer to the Hebrew language. But the Ashkenazi Jews, most of them were in Poland, they were influenced by the Polish dialect. And so you have the oi, 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 everything's with a yud, right? Instead of olam, it's oilam. You have that yud, that Y stuck in everywhere. Like instead of saying 33rd Street, they'll say 33rd Street. Well, the Hebrew is the same way. In short, the Hebrew language in the Ashkenazi countries was badly distorted, where in the Arab countries, it was more preserved. And so Avraham Herzlich, of blessed memory, passed away this past week. It was very important to him to pronounce the letters properly. And he made sure his children read in the Yemenite way, and it pained him to hear the distortion of the Hebrew language. Let me just give you one example, which is kind of comical. We say on Rosh Hashanah, after the blowing of the shofar, Hayom Harat Olam. Hayom Harat Olam, which means today the world was born. Like Harat, like Herayon. Today the world was born. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the world. So Hayom Harat Olam, we say. But those who speak with the Ashkenazi accent, instead of saying Hayom Harat Olam, they'll say Hayom Haras Olam. The Tuf becomes a Saf. And they're saying Hayom Haras Olam, which means today the world was destroyed. That is, by distorting the Taf into a Saf, instead of Harat Olam, it's Haras Olam, which means today the world was destroyed. So everybody in the Ashkenazi shuls are singing, after the shofar blow, instead of today the world was born, they're saying today the world was destroyed. Anyway, in some circles, that's a funny joke. And so Avraham Herzlich, when he first came to Israel, he hung out in these Yemenite communities like Bereket, and he eventually married a woman from Tunis. He had 12 kids. He taught them all how to read in the Yemenite way, ta'amim, the Yemenite accents and proper pronunciation of the letters, and they all do. Now, being a shepherd in the fields, he had tremendous insights into the Torah, something that only a man in nature could come up with. And he wasn't a shepherd in order to make a living out of it. He didn't do it for parnasa, not for the milk from the goats. He didn't sell it. He didn't sell the goats the shechtim for meat. He did it just to be out in the fields, for the spirituality of it. He went out with the flocks to be out in nature. And he would often bring what the Rambam, Maimonides, what the Rambam says in the Mishnah Torah, in Halachot Yesodei Torah, the second halacha. What does Rambam say? He says, how does one reach a level of loving and fearing God? How do you reach that level? How do we build a relationship with an infinite and unknowable God? That's what the Rambam asks. How could you come close to God? He's way up there and you're way down here. How do you build a connection to him? So the Rambam answers that when one contemplates God's great and wondrous creation and sees the immense wisdom which went into it, he or she will become awed and inspired. He will develop an awe of and love for the Creator of such beauty and magnificence, as well as a desire to know him better. So the Rambam's saying that if you want to get close to Hashem, even more than praying or studying Torah, he says get out in nature and just observe the perfection of it and the awesomeness of nature. And that's why Avraham Herzlich went out with his flocks every day. Because of that spiritual effect on him, he felt that he was knowing the Creator more by being in nature, away from all the city smog and the high tech and the hustle and the bustle of the rat race. According to him, that pulls people away from God, because all that high tech is actually anti-nature, so to speak. And so he was very extreme about this. I mean, he was anti-technology. He thought it was ruining the world. He would even try to stay away from using electricity. If he was invited to speak, which he often was because he could have been a motivational speaker in his own way, he would request sometimes to darken the room. He'd say, shut off the lights, and he would shut off his microphone, and sometimes it was annoying because you couldn't hear him as well. But he didn't want to use technology. And you can call it extreme because what we usually say is technology isn't good or bad. It depends how you use it. But I guarantee it that if you heard his point of view, it would make a lot of sense. And it especially makes sense now today when you see the entire world with a screen in front of their face. So you could see the logic to his words. And so he came to the conclusion that the best way of being close to Hashem is being a shepherd. And he would often mention that's why our forefathers were shepherds. Moses, David, Yaakov. Not for nothing were they shepherds, because that was their way of getting close to God. But he was a lot more than that. It wasn't just a personal spiritual thing. For him, that was the way to bring the redemption. For instance, speaking the proper way, the Yemenite way, of course, which he thought was the right way, that would be a uniting thing if we all spoke Hebrew properly. But the thing that he talked about the most about being shepherd wasn't just about being in nature, but the fact that if you love Eretz Yisrael, you got to be on Eretz Yisrael. You got to walk on the land of Israel. What is Eretz Yisrael? The land, not the pavement, not the concrete, not the roads, the land of Israel. So he would say, I'm on the land. And this makes me love the land because I'm on it. If you're riding your car all day on the roads, you're not really on the land of Israel. That's how we saw it. You have the famous verse where God says to Abraham, Kol makom asher kaf raglecha. Every place where you set your foot down is yours. So Avraham would emphasize that it says where you place your foot, not where you roll your wheels. You're not supposed to drive on it. You're supposed to be on it, to walk on it, to feel the land of Israel. But like I said, it's not just a personal thing. For him, it was the way to the redemption. Shepherding flocks. And I'll tell you what I mean. He looked at the settlements. How are the settlements set up if you go to Judea and Samaria? Well, you have a yeshuv, one settlement, another settlement. All the houses are about a half a dunam. Everyone's got their chetzi dunam, half a dunam. Little boxes like the suburbs. Houses with red roofs, one after another. They all look about the same. And that's how the yeshuvim is set up. Everybody's got their fence, their shin gimel. If you want to leave, they open the gate for you. In the meantime, what's going on outside your fence. Well, the Arabs are walking around the land. They're shepherding it. They're engaging in agriculture. They're capturing the land because all we're doing is taking our cars from our settlement and driving to Tel Aviv or Petach Tikva or Jerusalem. We're not really on the land. We're driving in our cars from one spot to another. But in the meantime, between the settlements, there's no Jewish presence there. If you're driving between settlements on your way to Jerusalem, you never see just a Jew walking around. It's always an Arab walking around or some Arab on a donkey. We're in our cars. We leave our settlement. We come back to a settlement. We never went on the land. And so each settlement has its fence. And what would happen is the Arabs would come up to your fence with their flocks or build houses up to the fence like you have in Kiryat Arba today. And that's because you've defined yourself by saying, Ani Ad Kan, up to here is my settlement, and the rest I abandoned to you, my Arab neighbor, because you're not using it. And as the expression goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. So you got to have a chazaka on it. You got to show a presence. And that's what the flocks do. When Abraham took his flocks out, outside the perimeters of the settlement, that's a chazaka on the land. You have a Jewish presence there. You're spreading out. You know those campaigns by the KKL to plant a tree in Israel? Why do you plant a tree? It gives a Jewish presence there. But if you have a sheep, that's like a moving tree. You're conquering the land. You're showing that the land is yours now. You're showing by your actions that the land belongs to you because you're using it. You're herding your flocks there. You're planting tomatoes there. You're doing something with it. And so Avraham Herzlich eventually became an inspiration for what we call the hilltop movement. Because today you do have hilltops. You do have Jewish shepherds. You do have Jewish youth who walk around in the land of Israel like it's theirs, not just from settlement to settlement in their cars to their high-tech job. You have Jews who have gone back to nature, who have a totally different mindset than the ones who established these settlements, where it's chetzi dunam, half a dunam for every person, instead of spreading out like a Jew should, like it used to be. Every Jew taking his portion in his piece of land. That's starting to happen now. We have hilltops all over the place. And some of those hilltops are driving the Arabs out because they're cramping their style. I've talked about this in other podcasts. And it's also a matter of Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. When a Jew walks proudly in the lands of Judea and Samaria, not just inside his ghetto-like yeshuv, but he walks freely outside of the confines of his yeshuv, that's a sanctification of God's name. And when he's afraid to do that, and you only see the Arabs walking on the land between the settlements, that's a chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name when there's no Jewish presence there. And today, more and more Jews are getting outside of the fences of their settlements to be out in the land, to show a possession by way of presence. And this whole movement of Jews going back to the land and back to nature, basically it went through Avraham Herzlich. They got inspiration from him. Not through a lecture in an auditorium or a podcast. He was out in the fields, and they came out to him in the fields, and he spoke to them, and he inspired them, and he explained to them the need to get out of the ghetto-like fences of the settlements and get back to nature and go truly in the way of David HaMelech, the shepherd, and at the same time, in a national sense, to conquer the land, to put a chazaka on it, a presence there. Because once a Jew walks around those areas, the Arabs don't go there anymore. In our settlement, for example, in Tapur, for years we had a fence. And the Arabs from the nearby village would come up to your fence. And what are you going to do? You're not using that area. But the minute a small hilltop was established, just the very fact that there was a presence there, and Jews were now getting out of the perimeter, and now Jews were walking to that hilltop, back and forth, by doing that, you clean out that area. You don't define yourself that I am Ad Kan, I'm up to this point, and that's it. And so Avraham Herzlich inspired a generation of young Jews, the proper way to do Yeshuv Haaretz, how to settle the land in the proper way, the way our ancestors did. And so unofficially, and it's all unofficial, he obviously had no official position, but he was the father of the Hilltop movement in his own way. And there are a lot of good Jewish groups like AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, and other groups who come to Israel to visit and see the settlers in Judea and Samaria. And for so many of these tours, Abraham the Shepherd was a must-see for them. And they would ride in their air-conditioned buses on the windy road into Puach, which led to the fields where Abraham was pasturing the goats. And they would just love listening to him. He would board the bus and he would insist that they get off the bus. To him, that's not touring the land of Israel. How are you touring the land of Israel by being on a bus all day? You got to get out on the land. So he would knock them all the time, and they loved it. And he would often say that he's originally from America. And the word America sounds in Hebrew like Amreka, which means an empty nation. So we'd say, I'm from Amreka, America, the empty nation. So he was one who left the exile of America and totally turned his back on it. He was totally against the whole Western culture. For him, that totally contradicted the Jewish way. Most people who make Aliyah, they take their culture with them. Like me, I still like to listen to my favorite songs and check out what's going on in sports sometimes. But for Abraham, that is total impurity. He saw everything about the American exile as bad. That's why he never would speak English unless he had to, like when these American tour groups came. So yeah, you can say he was kind of extreme in his views. But to do what he did, you have to be extreme in a good way. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of documentaries that were made about him and books. And you can check it out yourself. Write in Avraham Herzlich, Jewish shepherd. See what this man was about. And I want to play a couple of audio clips where Avraham Herzlich was interviewed. And all these words spoken by Avraham Herzlich, he's in the fields with his sheep. It's not in the studio, not in some interview room. He's speaking from where he works, in the fields with his goats. And in this first audio snippet, Avraham explains how it was that our ancestors, Moses, Jacob, David, they were all shepherds.
That our forefathers were shepherds, not out of lack of alternatives. They wouldn't want to be computer programmers. They wouldn't want to be speculators in the stock market. They wanted to have contact with God's work. They chose this.
Now I'm going to play for you Avraham Herzlich giving a lesson in the Hebrew language, connecting Adam, which means man, to Adamah, which means earth.
Baruchim habayim, welcome to the land of Israel. I'm on the land, sitting on a rock. You see, people don't understand. When you're in Tel Aviv, on the pavement, you're not on the land. And certainly when you're in America, in a big city, maybe in the subway, people are disconnected from the earth. I want to teach two words in Hebrew, man and earth. In English, there's no connection. Man, earth. In Hebrew, the two things are directly connected. Because man was created from the earth. The word for man is Adam. The word for earth is Adamah. You can hear the connection. Your ears, let your ears work. Listen. Adam, Adamah.
And here is Abraham's very original take on how to educate children properly and how not to.
It's almost, in my eyes, it's almost illegal to raise a child in a big city. The air is polluted. You're giving the child weakness. He's growing in weakness. If the rabbis were wise enough, I think they should say, you cannot raise a child in Bnei Brak. They have asthma there, children. It's humid. It's polluted.
In this next audio, Avraham talks about the problems of speed and fast cars, even though he himself had a BMW motorcycle at the age of 18. But here Avraham, reflective, talks about the problems of the technology and the speed and how everything is moving so fast, which is dangerous physically and spiritually.
Speed kills, not only because of accidents, the rapidity of a person's life. When you're running and you're under pressure, you're losing everything. Not only your health, you're losing thoughts. See, I have clear thoughts in the field. That's what I have. 3-4 hours of clear thinking is worth a great deal.
Like I mentioned, after the murder of Binyamin and Talia Kahana, Avraham Herzlich and his wife moved from Kfar Zeitim, near Tiberias, to Tepuach. And Avraham Herzlich did so by foot. And here he explains that whole experience of walking from Tiberias to Kfar Tepuach by foot.
I brought 200 goats by foot. which was a 10-day walk with the animals. Very, very difficult, but very, very stimulating. A wonderful way to get places by walking by foot. Not with a knapsack, but with 200 goats. But it was very, very interesting. Going over the mountain, not on the road. I used to look at the people in the cars, and you have to have pity on them. They didn't know what the world was all about. They were whizzing by, and I was walking by. It's a wonderful experience.
And for our last audio snippet, here's Avraham Herzlich with a little Aliyah pitch.
We shouldn't be out of Israel. We have our land. We have our land. We have our country. Life is very difficult in Israel. But if we were together and leave the galut, things would change immediately.
So on that note, I'll be signing off. Nobody can say it better than the legendary Avraham Herzlich anyway, who passed away this week at the age of 85 years old. But he left a legacy behind him. Not just his own kids, but the Hilltop youth, whom he inspired, who carry on his holy work by being on the land and working the land and spreading out all over the land, the holy land of Eretz Yisrael. That's it for me. Don't forget to listen to my Bible classes, Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes. It's a podcast on Spotify. Of course, Avraham the Shepherd was very, very connected to the Tanakh. We used to talk about it together all the time. So you can find that shiur by Googling Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes, or you can check out my website, lennygoldberg.com. And there you'll have a link to this podcast and to the Bible classes and to some great Rabbi Kahana books by Binyamin Zef Kahana. As I mentioned, Binyamin Kahana was the son-in-law of Avraham Herzlich. And I'll be back next week, same time, same station.